you for tuning into From the Cowboy State podcast. I am your host, Michaela Getz, and we are back for season 3. It's crazy to think that a year ago we were just getting started with this, and now we have listeners in multiple states across the U.S., all the different regions in the U.S., and then 38 countries, guys. Incredible. Thank you all for your continued support. As a reminder, this is University of Wyoming Agriculture and Natural Resources podcast. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, don't hesitate to reach out to me at mgetz@uwyo.edu. We'd love to hear from y'all. So we're going to go ahead and get started with season 3, episode 1. We have got Lucy Pauley with Wyoming Department of Ag joining us.
Well, thank you so much, Michaela. I'm Lucy Pauley. I'm the mediation coordinator for the Wyoming Department of Ag. And so my role is to help ag producers, land managers, folks involved in agriculture navigate a wide variety of disputes. And so we provide mediation for things like neighbor-neighbor issues, farm credit, ag business. But what I'll talk to you about today is the role that we can play and the resources that we have to help farm and ranch families who are either navigating the succession planning process or even working on estate planning.
Great. So let's go ahead then and jump in and talk about what is that process for when you have either one family member or maybe the entire family contact you and say that they need to set up a succession plan for their operation.
So in the last few years, we've had some of our mediators go through a training, and we're now certified farm succession coordinators. And so the training was from some folks some organizations in the Midwest. So they refer to farms out here in Wyoming. Obviously, we focused on the ranching part of it, but we do, there are farms in Wyoming also. But basically, our process for guiding families through this issue it's pretty simple. We help everybody figure out where are we right now. Mm-hmm. And so that we actually have a workbook, and we help them gather their financial information. What does the operation look like? What are the assets? What are the debts? What is everyone's role on the operation? What are the factors that affect the transition? Does everybody want the farm or ranch to continue? Sometimes that can be a question. Are there off-farm heirs that need to be brought in? Does everybody agree on a vision? And then a lot of that is just gathering that basic information of where are we right now. The cool thing about our resources, and a lot of it is work that people take back on their own and fill out worksheets and have discussions and then come back together with, we play more of a facilitative role in getting everybody to the table, conversations. The second step of the process then is helping the family figure out where do they want to be. And so we talk to the owner generation or the older generation. How retired do those individuals want to be? What do they see as their role? Some folks don't want to ever retire. Some folks want to be involved, till the day they're carried out. What role do they want for future decision making? We also work with the successor generation. How do they feel about the current operation? How ready do they feel to take over? Do they want more mentoring in certain areas? Do they need more information? The biggest part of this process, of this step, is just getting everybody on the same page. What do we want the operation to look like in 3 years, in 5 years, in 10 years? How do we see everybody's role coming together? And then the last step of the process is how do they get there? So they have this shared vision, and then what steps do they need to take to make sure that vision happens? At this point, we talk more about the retirement again. We talk about how to have family meetings. We talk about what operating agreements may look like. And then this is an important part. How do we bring in other professionals? A lot lot of farms and ranchers may have an accountant that they work with. They may have an attorney. But if they don't, then we have some real practical advice on how to find folks in your area, how to interview people, how to find people that have a good fit for what. So that's our process. Some families that may take, a short amount of time. They may have figured out a lot of those things and they just need the facilitator to help everybody communicate. Other families, it can be an ongoing process where we're working, it'll take a while.
Sure. And I guess let me just check. So when people come in for your services, is this a free service that Department of Ag can provide to them? Or is this something where they need to set up an appointment, kind of like what you had said, with a lawyer or an accountant and so on and so forth?
Sure. Right now it is a free service. We have a grant from the U.S. Department of Agriculture that allows us to work with the families at no charge. Yeah, okay. Hopefully.
Well, so you had mentioned, folks listing out, gathering their finances and putting that into the workbook, discussing their assets, debts, everything like that. How does that kind of financial planning, if you will, roll into the family dynamics that you have to work with, where they see themselves in 5, 10, hopefully 50 years from now? How does that all kind of contribute and fit in?
This is one of the areas where we see some of the conflicts start to pop up for a lot of different reasons. I'd say the trend is that families aren't always willing to be really open about this with each other. And I think that that's a cultural issue. I think that's the way that, previous generations handled things, is that you just kept this information kind of quiet. And so one of the roles that we can play is just helping people feel comfortable talking about that with each other. Financial planning is obviously so important. You need to make sure the business is viable for anyone to be able to continue it, much less family members. You need to make sure that it's viable enough that it can support the family's. We need to know what it's going to look like for retirement for that owner or older generation or whatever that looks like. Issues like what if they need long-term care can complicate the financial planning. And so it's hard for people to talk about, but it's such an important part of this process. Yeah, absolutely. To bring people together, you just have to be willing to open about it. And see what there is. Yeah.
So when you're having these discussions, I think sometimes folks think that the stakeholders are whoever's currently running the operation and then maybe the owner. But do you see benefits to bringing in, even if they aren't directly involved, bringing in children that are involved or someone's other partner, things like that? Especially when discussing those finances.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it does get complicated. When we're starting to work with a family, we try to identify everybody that needs to be at the table. And that's definitely the off-farm heirs who, even if they don't plan to stay on the farm or ranch, may have a financial interest, depending on how inheritances are being, divided out, bringing in spouses who are going to be living on that farm or ranch, even if they're not directly involved. It's a balancing act, but we have learned through trial and error that if people aren't involved in these conversations, but then they have, influence over decisions later, that can kind of make things more complicated. So we really work with the family to try to identify who needs to be here, who are decision makers, who's going to have, any influence in how things move forward, and make sure those people are part of the conversation.
That's great. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I know I've seen a lot of operations where it's maybe just grandma and grandpa, for example, but grandma handles all of the books. And then sometimes they don't always get brought into those conversations. So that makes a lot of sense, identifying the key stakeholders.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So we've kind of talked about, some tools that you send home for people to put back in their toolbox? We've talked about like different roles, everything like that, but what are some of the biggest challenges for specifically families in Wyoming that you've seen when it comes to this kind of setting up planning, just planning for the future, etc.?
Sure. I don't know that it's specific to Wyoming, but honestly, the biggest challenge that we see initially is communication. It's people haven't talked about what they want, any of the generations. The older generation hasn't talked about, what they think what they want their plan to be. The younger generation hasn't communicated, what kinds of things they would like to be in charge of. There's just, there's just a lot of people not talking. And I understand that these are tricky things to bring up. It can feel, the younger generation may feel like they sound greedy, or, the older generation may be thinking, I don't know how to divide this thing up fairly. And so I don't want to hurt feelings. So we're just not going to talk about it. But that I'd say the communication it's the biggest challenge we see. And bringing everybody together, having some of these tough discussions initially can be a really good way to just get folks talking about it. I think that another common challenge is the issue of off farm and ranch heirs. You've probably heard people talk before about this issue of fair versus equal can be really challenging. When there's more than one heir, but the farm or ranch can really only support one family at a time, then that can be tough to figure out. How do we leave something that's fair to these people that aren't coming back to the farm or ranch, without, we don't want to damage relationships, but we also, anytime you have to divide a farm or ranch into 5 pieces, it probably means the end of that farm or ranch, right? Even though our places in Wyoming are big, most operations are working on such a thin margin that there's not a lot of wiggle room there. So we work with families to talk about what are the expectations of those off-farm folks, and then are there other ways that they can feel included without just dividing the whole thing?
Sure.
So, and then I'd say that the other challenge that we deal with is the issue of transferring management. You do have moms and dads, grandpas and grandmas who don't ever not want to be in charge. And so, and that's how they, took over. But also looking at how do you keep that successor generation engaged and involved and wanting to stay there if, without letting them be in charge of different things. So I'd say those are the ones that we see that come to us kind of in a nutshell.
That makes sense. Do you see, so on your last point, talking about handing over management responsibilities, et cetera, do you see, obviously you see a lot of folks struggle with that, but do you see that deter younger generation farmers and ranchers from wanting to come onto an existing operation, whether it's they're an heir to the operation or not, they're just looking to get into that line of work?
I have worked with some families where that was very much an issue, that the younger generation was reaching a point where they thought, I'll just go work for somebody else. And at least it'll be more clear what my roles and responsibilities are. And, or maybe I'll go find my own way to get some property and be my own boss. And that's where I can say, as this neutral person, like, this is what I hear them saying. And I hear you saying you want this place to be in the family for 5 more generations. How can we reconcile that? But I do think it's an issue. And I do think that there's a lot of producers out there, though, who recognize that and are looking at ways to allow some of that decision making to, change hands. One of the great tools in our workbook is a sheet for the older generation to consider, like real basic things like, do you still want to be involved in calving? Do you still want to drive a tractor? Like, as you retire, what are the actual activities you want to do? And then we look at, okay, how can that next generation come in and start taking some of these things, take ownership in some of these things. So I think that's fun.
That makes a lot of sense because I think people think about maybe like the big overview picture of retiring, passing it on, whatever. But then when you actually break down all those key aspects of what they actually want to be doing,
Right.
like you said, do you want to be in a tractor? Do you want to be fully retired and in Hawaii?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. What parts, there are some folks who I think when they can decide, I love haying. I just want to hay. Great. Now we know, and now everybody else can plan around. Okay, Grandpa still wants to hay. Here's how we're going to fill in all the other things. I think that can be a really useful tool. And the other thing that I heard this years ago from a professor in Nebraska, and he talked about the importance of bringing new tools or new technologies back to the operation with the next generation. So this idea of you don't just get to come back, by default, but you go and you learn how to be a welder, or you go and getting an accounting degree. And I like that idea. We don't do as much of that with this process, but just getting folks to think about what are the skills you can bring back that help the operation in other ways and that help everybody move forward.
That makes complete sense. I can absolutely see that. Yeah. So let's say that a family just keeps putting off coming to set up a meeting with y'all. What are some of those risks you see when a family does not set up a succession planning meeting with either yourself or another professional?
Sure. There's a lot. Even if they're not doing the succession planning, I hope that they're doing some sort of estate plan, because the tax implications and the issue of probate and all of that can be really difficult for the successors or even the survivors. And so we encourage folks, even if you can't see how you're going to move forward with a succession plan, make sure that estate part is taken care of. But then without the succession plan, we're just left with the family trying to figure out what that person really would have wanted. And that can be hard, because then you're dealing with, and we've had this happen, you have family members that are dealing with grief, the loss of that person, and then trying to fill in the gaps of who did they want to stay? How did they want the operation to continue? We're going to divide this ranch into 3 pieces, and that means none of it's going to continue. It's going to be sold off. It's going to be subdivided, whatever it is. And so just as hard as it may feel to bring everybody together and have these tough conversations, it's still going to be better than nobody knowing what you wanted and having to try to figure it out. We've worked through the mediation program. We've helped some families divide up an estate after the fact, and that it is tough, because we do, everybody spends a lot of time thinking Dad would have wanted this. Well, I don't think he would have, and wishing that we could have known what Dad might have wanted would have been helpful.
Yeah, everyone has their opinions, and like you said, I think grief plays such a big factor. If you're trying to do this after somebody has passed, that's a huge component. I've seen operations where, maybe you have a surviving spouse and they want to sell off everything because it's a reminder they don't want anything to do. But then you've got the other side, like the complete opposite side, where they don't want to touch anything. Everything stays the same. So
exactly the same. Yep. Absolutely. And I've, through the years, I've been approached by, adult children who are like, how do we start this? And they say, Dad says, I'm just going to die and let everybody figure it out. And I try to just get that conversation started. Even if you feel like the decisions are too complicated or too tough, let's just see where we go. Like,
Yeah.
Start the conversation, start talking about stuff, and maybe we can't figure out the whole thing, but maybe we can help address a few of the things and see how that works. But
Yeah.
it's tough, and I understand that generation, thinking that, but they're really not solving anything in the long
Sure.
run. And we can see it in the papers. There's families that sue each other in court over the estate. And I can't imagine that's what anybody would want their legacy to be there.
Right.
You know, the dissolution of the multi-generation farmer ranch because, we agree on what the plan should be.
Right. Right. So jumping back to something that you mentioned previously, you mentioned estate planning. So you guys help with that, but are there any tools, because you hear all of these terms like a family trust, putting your operation into an LLC, just all these different things. Are there any tools like that are effective for folks to use?
That's an area that I'm not as comfortable because I'm not an attorney. What we recommend that people do there is definitely find a good ag estate planning attorney in their area. The State Bar's website now has a search tool where you can kind of narrow down
Oh, nice.
Attorneys that focus in that area. But also, we really encourage people to talk to their friends and neighbors and get an idea of what's working for them. Looking at families that seems like it's working well, finding out for them what kind of models they're using. But all of those tools are very important to consider for the tax implications. But then also, again, it comes back to that everybody's on the same page. Everybody knows what the plan is or where the different sets. Working with attorneys, even working with accountants, sometimes they have a lot of that. So just finding those resources.
No, that makes absolute sense. So then let's jump forward to something else that personally, as an ag extension agent, we run into a lot. We'll get calls saying, hey, I need you to come out and look at my property, et cetera, et cetera. Oh, by the way, it's in a conservation or a land easement. So how does that, or does it even, I guess, factor into setting up your succession plan for your family or whomever?
So, what I know, conservation easements can be a tool in the succession planning because they can be a tool to either use the money that you receive from selling the conservation, be used to compensate off-farm heirs. I know people have done that before, especially for folks like up in your. It can help lower the taxable value of the property. So folks in your neck of the woods where land prices aren't necessarily compatible with agriculture, right? Yeah. That can be a good tool. But it also can help the family agree. We want this property to stay in agriculture. We're going to put an ag easement on it. That means, it can't be turned into 40-acre resorts, whatever it is. So in that way, and like I said, I've seen people do it to help compensate off-farm heirs, keep it in ag, keep that vision, and then lower the taxable. If there's a state tax coming up or things like that. A good tool.
That makes sense. That's good to know too. Like I said, being an ag agent up here, we'll go out to folks' place and they'll ask, something about cattle or the weeds or something like that. And then it's always, oh, we placed it in an easement. And so it's always just like an interesting kind of problem solving task because there's certain things you can and can't do, like,
right.
with the land.
Right. And I have heard from people, it makes it slightly complicated. Like if they're looking at buying or building another house.
Right.
Next generation. I mean, you want to be careful when you're setting up those easements to understand what you can and can't do, even different, events that can take place on the property, like an agri-tourism kind of thing. You'll want to make sure that you're very aware of what you're agreeing to in the easement. But usually there's like a building envelope included so that you can, add add another house, add another barn, things.
Interesting. Yeah, really good to know. So we've talked about some of the biggest challenges that you have: communication, getting everybody on the same place or on the same page in the same place, things like that. But when we talk about navigating disagreements within the family, how can you really dive into that process and help families figure out, this is what X person is doing, this is what Y person is doing, this is what we're going to do over here? And if they don't live on the land or have any effect in the operation, like maybe they're just going to stay out of it or not, how do you help families kind of navigate through those tough disagreements?
Sure. Yeah, and that's a big part of it too. Families are no family is perfect. No, every family has things that pop up, and stress. If folks are stressed about markets, or it's been a bad drought summer, like all of these things impact our ability to communicate with each other in the way that we would if everything was hunky-dory. And so what we can do as mediators is just help people bring up those tough topics. There's something about talking to a person who doesn't have a vested interest in your situation, this neutral third party, that can be helpful. It can be hard. It can be emotional, and people will have to be willing to get it out. But it can be valuable to just have that neutral third party there and talk about these difficult things. As mediators, as coordinators, we can bring up topics that maybe the family is hesitant to go out there, like dividing up the job duties. We just help people be very clear, and we take lots of notes. We write things down that people agree to, and I think that can be very helpful in. This person's in charge of morning irrigation. This person's in charge of the conversations with the feed store. Like, it sounds really simple, but we help people get really write those things down, and basically, like, developing job descriptions or job duties, just in a business, but doing that for families also can be helpful.
Interesting. Yeah, that makes complete sense. And so do you use that same process as well when thinking of how to work with heirs who are off the operation but maybe want to be involved, stuff like that? Is that kind of the same process you work through, or is that something maybe different?
No, it is. I mean, it comes back to that, bringing everybody together who has that interest. And then with the off-farm heirs is just getting them to, if they're bought into the vision that we want this farmer ranch to stay in Wyoming, what are they willing to compromise on or to give up in order to make sure that vision can happen? And that's often, we recognize that we're not going to have a financial benefit right now, but we're going to have a place for our kids to come, or we're going to, the family's going to build a little cabin that we get to come to every summer. That's going to be our share. I mean, there's a lot of, when you get people talking and brainstorming, you can come up with some creative ideas. But if we can get everybody truly bought into what that vision for the place is, I think sometimes it can help resolve some of these bigger issues that people feel like, oh, we should solve that one.
No, that makes complete sense. So I want to jump backwards a little bit. I asked you about conservation easements, ag leases, etc. But can we also talk about, you've got BLM leases as well, federal grazing permits. I know some folks up Sunlight Basin there off of the Beartooth Highway, and they've got, I don't even know how many different federal grazing permits so that they can rotate their cattle around. How does that factor into your succession plan? Is it just grandfathered in? Is it much more complicated?
I believe that most of those permits stay with the ranch entity. And so, the management of that entity changes those don't necessarily impact the grazing unless the ranch is divided into separate entities. Then that's when it's going to get complicated. But most of those, I believe, stay with that base property. I've never had. I haven't had folks where that's become an issue. Like it's usually just part of it stays with it. I do, obviously, if we have had situations where people divide the ranch into two separate places, and so then we do talk about okay, who's going to take on the BLM permits, who's going to take on. Sometimes there can be issues for service in holdings where they have some private property as part of the ranch. Then we talk about if we're dividing on those, but generally for the succession part, those permits.
Great. That makes sense. And that's good to know too, because I know sometimes those permits are really, really hard to work for and get approval on. So the fact that they stay with the operation and in theory, it's hopefully a seamless process. That's weird.
No, I can double check Michaela afterwards too, if we want to clarify that, but I'm pretty sure, just the state, you have to have the base property has to be connected to the permit, physically connected.
Right.
And as long as those stay in the same hand, the permits stay with that.
That makes total sense. So my next question for you, Lucy, obviously you cannot be in a million places at once. When people, need to have just a quick mediation meeting, or if they need to set up a more formal meeting, things like that. So other than yourself, obviously being the leading resource in the state, what other Wyoming resources are there for folks who maybe just want to dip their toes and get started in the process, or maybe need some more hand-holding, stuff like that?
Sure. Well, we do have mediators around the state, and we do have the ability to travel and send folks to different areas. We do more and more. We do our meetings over Zoom, over even over the phone. But I'm pleasantly surprised at the amount of producers who are willing to dive into the technology, and that is such a great way to then get the folks who live in other states, things like that, be part of the conversation. As far as other entities, I know that the stock growers have some resources on succession planning. I know they've done a series of workshops. I know the land trusts up in your area. I think is it the Teton County or the Jackson Hole Land Trust, I think, has a presence in Cody now. So the land trusts are an area that's working in there. Yeah. And then I'm trying to think who else, what other. Those are the ones I know about for sure. But like I said, with our program, we do have folks around the state, and we do have the ability to travel. And
that's really great.
Yeah, we've gone to all corners at this point.
Corners, the middle, all over the place.
Oh man, yes.
Too funny. So, and I apologize, I forgot to ask, how long have you been in your role?
A million years.
A million years.
I've been with the department my entire career, and I'm just coming up on 30 years. So.
Wow.
And I've been working on the mediation program for about the last 25 years or so.
Wow.
That's
really great. Yeah. Well, so
I started when I was incredibly young.
Hey, there's nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with that at all. No, too funny. So I guess, and I'm going to backtrack just a little bit. So you've been doing the mediation program, and then with the Department of Ag for 30 years. What would you say to somebody who maybe wants to get into this line of work, who wants to help families out with succession planning, do the mediation, everything else?
Sure. There's a lot of great resources now. When I first started, I have a degree in animal science, and then I have I know. And then I got my master's in public administration. But now there are actually, you can get bachelor's degrees and master's degrees in mediation and in conflict management. And then there's a lot of different resources for getting the expertise on farm and ranch planning. The group that we got our training through is called the International Farm Transition Network, IFTN. and they offer a good training. There's a lot of resources online that you can follow, but it really comes down to understanding the challenges that ag producers face. And I think Wyoming is a little more unique than some of our other states, but understanding the issues we have here, understanding what's happening in ag, the average age of the producer continues to climb, and finding ways for that next generation to stay in ag and to come back to the farmer ranch. There are some challenges there that I think are really important for people to understand, and then just being comfortable with emotions and comfortable with people needing to get stuff out on the table, and getting comfortable with conflict happens. Conflict is normal. Family conflict is normal. Nobody is conflict free. But working through it and coming out on the other side can be really rewarding, and helping families, meet their goals of keeping that farm or ranch going is what keeps me going too. So.
Wow. Well, that's really inspirational. Yeah, I like the being comfortable, being uncomfortable, basically.
Yes,
Yeah.
definitely. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. When I first started, I inherited this program, one of those other duties as assigned.
Yeah.
And I was not a person that enjoyed conflict. I really didn't, but going through the training and then playing that role of the third party has really helped me. Sometimes tough conversations just have to happen, and we can put it off and we can hope it goes away, but eventually we just need to get it out and move through it.
Yeah.
I see that with my farmer ranch families. Sometimes we just gotta figure it out.
Just gotta push through. And tiptoeing doesn't always help people.
Doesn't, no. And hoping it'll go away. Or sometimes you just have to address it. Let's figure it out. Just like, farmers or ranchers are great problem solvers. They know how to, fix a tractor in the middle of the field. They know how to diagnose a sick cow. And this is no different. Like, just, we're going to figure it out. And addressing it is so important.
Yeah. No, that's I agree 100%. My dad comes from a multi-generational farm in Illinois, and he is one of the smartest people I know. Him, my grandpa, my great grandpa, they will be doing like algebra, high level algebra to, calculate, well, how much nitrate needs to go on this much for this many acre, and I'm like, that's not stuff that I can just do.
Right. Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. Yeah.
Too funny. So I do want to jog back to one more question just about the role specifically. So since you've been doing this for as long as you have, what trends have you seen either come up, shift, ebb and flow kind of out when you're helping families?
Sure. The biggest trend is that more families are willing to reach out for our help. Our case numbers right now are as high as they've ever been. And that's, most of that is our family discussions. We still have some of our other just, routine. The U.S. Department of Ag offers mediation as a step in their appeal process. So we always get a few requests for, somebody was denied a program or denied an application, somebody's behind on their payments, whatever it is. But the bulk of our work, people are more willing to reach out for help. I think the other trend we've seen is this issue of the off-farm heirs. More and more that there are more families where one person stayed, everybody else left, but still have an interest in that farmer ranch being successful. I think the other one that we're seeing is more people interested in some sort of retirement that and navigating that. Like, how do we make sure that mom and dad are taken care of, but they still want to live on the ranch? What are the issues that come up with that? How do families address, long-term care? All of those things are, especially in the last 10 years, a lot more of that. How do we navigate all of these complicated issues and keep the farmer ranch going.
I love that for folks. And I mean, in the perfect world, it works out for everybody, but I love that folks are at least more and more having that conversation and trying to set themselves up for success.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. Yeah.
Sweet. Well, Lucy, my last question for you, I promise, well, maybe, hopefully, is what advice would you give to, because, and I guess let me back up. I asked this because up in Park County, you see a lot of folks move in and then they say, hey, I'm just getting started with 10 head of cattle, 20 sheep. What should I do next? And, normally we're talking about like grazing and making sure they've got their facility set up appropriately, etc. But what advice would you give to that first generation farmer or rancher who wants to get started in their operation, but also, needs to get started in succession planning because life happens?
Sure. I think that the advice I would give is just don't be afraid to get it started and talk.
Yeah.
Talk even when your kids are young. Start figuring out who wants to be here, who wants to keep running it, and if everybody does, then how do we figure out how to grow this place so that everybody can come back, or how do we figure out what skills we need people to come back with? But just to not be afraid to talk about it and to be open to those new ideas that kids might, or kids that the next generation might have. I think that's another issue that I feel like is maybe getting a little better, but just being open to all these new ideas they may be coming back with, and how can they be incorporated so that if our common goal as a family is for this place to grow and be in our family for generations to come, what do we need to do to get there?
That makes sense. That's really great. Well, Lucy, I don't have any more questions for you. Is there anything else that you feel like folks who tune in, and we do get listeners from multiple countries, so we're Wyoming,
Sure.
But it goes out everywhere, really.
Sure.
But is there anything else you want to make sure that we share with the audience or discuss?
I don't think so. Folks can, find us on the website, the Wyoming Department of Ag. If they are in other states or other places, I can help them if they're looking for resources in their own community. They can reach out to me, and I can help them find those. But I really think just recognizing the need for that communication and even if folks don't want to engage in a process like ours, but they're just looking for tips on how to start those conversations, I'm happy to help, give them some ideas for that too. But just don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to look for that assistance, and don't be afraid to use it, because it's, these are really tough issues, and it can be really helpful just to have another set of ears or eyes helping you move forward. Yeah. So don't be afraid to ask for help. That's like my common theme for
exactly.
ag.
Communicate, ask for help when you need it.
Yeah, exactly.
Those are fantastic takeaways.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Michaela. This was really fun.
Oh, good. I'm glad. Thank you so much for being on here. I think this is going to be a bang up episode. So thank you so much.
Good.
Alrighty, y'all, that is a wrap on our first episode of our third season. I sincerely hope you enjoyed listening to Lucy and all of the different resources that are out there for succession planning, just your family in general, etc. If you need assistance, please don't hesitate to reach out. And too soon is not a concept when it comes to succession planning. So reach out to Lucy. If, she can't come to you directly, like she mentioned, that there are multiple mediators throughout the entire state of Wyoming. And if you're in a different state tuning in, there's a good chance that you have mediation resources. So again, if you're not sure where to start, get in touch with Lucy. We are happy to help. As always, I'm your host, Michaela Getz. This has been a University of Wyoming Extension, Agriculture, and Natural Resources podcast. Thank you all so much for tuning in.
As a reminder, this is the University of Wyoming Extension podcast. The university is committed to equal opportunity for all persons in all facets of the university's operations and is an equal opportunity / affirmative action employer. If you have any questions, comments, concerns about this statement, please don't hesitate to reach out to mgetz@uwyo.edu and we can get your questions answered. And if you have any questions, comments, concerns about the podcast as well, again, don't hesitate to reach out to that email address, mgetz@uwyo.edu. Again, this has been a University of Wyoming Extension, Agriculture, and Natural Resources podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in.
Funding for this UW Extension program is provided by the John P. Elbogen Foundation, Communities, Agriculture, and Rural Living Project Funds.